The train lurched to a stop at the Red Bluff, California depot, just as the sun began its descent toward the Sierra Nevada, painting the dusty platform in shades of amber and rust. And Willa Owens stepped down with nothing but a carpetbag clutched in her trembling fingers, and a letter she had read so many times the creases threatened to tear through the paper entirely. The year was 1874, and she had traveled 3,000 miles from Philadelphia to marry a man whose careful penmanship had wooed her through the winter months, each word measured and polite, promising a simple life on a cattle ranch where the air was clean and the work was honest. She had expected someone refined from those letters, someone who understood poetry and spoke in complete sentences, someone who might have stepped out of the parlors she had known back east. The reality that strode toward her across that platform made her breath catch somewhere between her throat and her lungs. Quentin Jameson stood well over 6 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to block out the setting sun, wearing dusty chaps over worn denim and a shirt that had seen better days before being mended at least 3 times. His hat sat low on his brow, shadowing eyes that were startlingly blue in a face weathered brown by years under the California sky. A week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and when he removed his hat in a gesture that seemed almost uncertain, his dark hair stuck up in directions that suggested he had been working hard right up until the moment he had to fetch her. There was nothing refined about him, nothing that matched the careful prose she had memorized. "Miss Owens," he said, and his voice was rough as creek gravel, lacking the smooth cadence she had imagined when reading his letters aloud in her boarding-house room. "I am Quentin Jameson. Welcome to Red Bluff." She stood frozen, unable to reconcile this rough-hewn cowboy with the man who had written about wildflowers in the spring meadows and the way morning light gilded the Sacramento River. Her hand tightened on her bag until her knuckles went white. He must have noticed her hesitation because something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his eyes that might have been hurt or might have been resignation. "I know I do not look like much right now. Lost 3 head of cattle this morning to a broken fence, and I have been chasing them through the brush since dawn. Did not have time to make myself presentable." The apology in his tone, gruff though it was, loosened something in her chest. She found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "You wrote that you ran a cattle ranch. I suppose I should have understood what that meant." "The letters," he said, turning his hat over in his hands in a gesture that betrayed his nervousness. "Those took me a long time to write." "I am better with a pen than I am with speaking, Miss Owens. Always have been." She nodded slowly, taking in the honesty in his words. Around them, the platform was clearing as other passengers were met by family or headed toward the town proper. The depot building stood weathered and small against the vast sky, and beyond it, she could see the sprawl of Red Bluff, a frontier town that looked nothing like Philadelphia's neat brick streets. Dust devils swirled in the unpaved roads, and the buildings were mostly wood construction, many with false fronts that made them look grander than they were. "I have a wagon," Quentin said, gesturing toward where a sturdy vehicle waited with 2 horses in harness. "The ranch is about an hour's ride from town. We can stop at the hotel if you want to rest first, or if you want time to think things over." There was something in the way he said it, a carefulness that suggested he was giving her an out, a chance to change her mind before she went too far from civilization. Willa looked at this stranger who was supposed to become her husband, at the gentleness in his rough manner, and made her decision. "I came here to see your ranch, Mr. Jameson. I would like to continue." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. He reached for her bag, and she let him take it, noting the calluses on his hands and the careful way he handled her one possession. He loaded it into the wagon bed where she could see supplies covered with canvas, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and he released her the moment she was settled, as though afraid to presume too much. The ride out of town gave her time to observe him without the pressure of conversation. He handled the horses with easy competence, his posture relaxed, despite the tension she could sense in him. The landscape rolled past, golden hills dotted with oak trees, the air carrying scents of dry grass and dust, and something herbal she could not name. It was so different from the east that she felt unmoored, uncertain of everything except the solid presence of the man beside her. "Your letters mentioned you lost your family," she ventured finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "I am sorry for that." His jaw tightened. "Fever took my parents and younger sister 5 years back, left me the ranch and more emptiness than I knew what to do with. My brother went to San Francisco, wanted nothing to do with cattle. It has just been me and the hired hand since then." "I lost my parents 2 years ago," Willa said quietly. "My father's debts took everything else. My aunt took me in, but she made it clear I was a burden she could not afford to keep. When your advertisement appeared in the matrimonial news, it seemed like Providence." He glanced at her then, really looked at her for the first time since that initial meeting on the platform. "You are braver than you know, coming all this way on the word of a stranger. Or more desperate," she said with more honesty than she had intended. "Honest, at least," he replied, and there was approval in his tone. "I can work with honest." The ranch appeared as they crested a rise, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley where a creek ran silver in the fading light. The main house was larger than she had expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wraparound porch and actual glass windows that caught the sunset. Barns and outbuildings spread out behind it, corrals holding horses and cattle, and she could see 2 men working near one of the barns who looked up at their approach. Quentin pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and set the brake before climbing down. He came around to help her, and this time when his hands circled her waist to lift her down, she felt the strength in him, the easy way he managed her weight. He set her on her feet but did not immediately step back. "I want you to understand something before you go inside," he said, his voice low and serious. "I wrote those letters because I am lonely, yes, but also because I believe in doing right by people. If you decide this is not what you want, I will pay your fare back to Philadelphia and give you enough money to get established somewhere. You are not trapped here, Miss Owens. Not ever." The kindness in those words, coming from this rough-handed cowboy who smelled of horses and hard work, made her throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. "That means more than you know." He nodded and finally stepped back, reaching for her bag. "Let me show you the house. Mrs. Chen has been keeping it clean and cooking meals. She lives in town but comes out most days. She will be a good friend to you if you stay." The interior of the house surprised her again. The furniture was simple but well made, the floors clean despite the dust outside, and there were small touches that spoke of someone trying to make a home rather than just a place to sleep. Wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table, curtains at the windows, books on a shelf in what appeared to be a sitting room. "I have been preparing the main bedroom for you," Quentin said, leading her up the stairs. "I will take one of the smaller rooms. I want you to be comfortable, and I figure we should take time to know each other before we make any permanent arrangements." He opened a door to reveal a spacious room with a large bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, and windows that looked out over the valley. Her bag looked small and inadequate when he set it on the chair. "It is lovely," she said, meaning it. "Truly?" I will leave you to freshen up, he said, already backing toward the door. Come down when you are ready. I need to check on those cattle I spent all day chasing, but I will be back for supper. Mrs. Chen left stew on the stove. He was gone before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs, and then she heard the front door close. Willa stood in the center of the room that was supposed to become hers and tried to make sense of the day. The man downstairs was nothing like she had imagined, rough where she had expected smooth, direct where she had expected courtly. Yet there had been kindness in every gesture, a gentleness that his appearance belied. She unpacked her single bag, hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe that smelled of cedar, arranging her few personal items on the dresser. Everything she owned in the world fit into this room with space to spare, and the reality of her situation settled over her. She was in California, a place she had only read about to marry a stranger who wrote poetry but looked like he could wrestle a bear. The reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a woman with dark blonde hair coming loose from its pins, brown eyes too large and a face made pale by travel, wearing a traveling suit that was already dusty despite her best efforts. She was 22 years old, and she had gambled everything on a series of letters and the desperate hope that anywhere was better than being a burden to relatives who did not want her. She washed her face and hands in the basin, changed into a simpler dress, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, but through the windows she could see Quentin in the distance, working with his men among the cattle. She found the kitchen, discovered the stew keeping warm on the cast iron stove, and began exploring cupboards until she found plates and utensils. By the time Quentin returned, the table was set and the stew was ladled into bowls. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the domestic scene with an expression she could not quite read. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I need to learn where things are if I am going to live here," she replied practically. "And I was hungry." He nodded and moved to the sink, washing his hands and face with the efficiency of someone used to doing for himself. When he sat down across from her, she could see the weariness in the lines around his eyes. "How bad was the damage from the broken fence?" she asked. "Could have been worse. We found all the cattle and none of them wandered onto railroad land. That would have meant fines we cannot afford right now. One of my hands, Miguel, is mending the fence now. Should be done before full dark." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Willa gathered her courage. "Your letters were beautiful, Mr. Jameson. You wrote about this land like you loved it." "I do," he said simply. "And please call me Quentin. If we are going to try to make this work, we should at least use first names. Then you should call me Willa." He tested her name, his rough voice somehow making it sound new. "Willa. That suits you." "You have not asked me anything about myself," she observed. "Aren't you curious?" "I figured you would tell me what you wanted me to know when you were ready." He met her eyes across the table. "I am not good at small talk, Willa, never have been. When I write, I have time to think about what I want to say, how to say it right. But talking, that is different. I tend to be too direct and it puts people off." "I would rather have direct than false courtesy," she said. "What do you want to know? Are you afraid of me?" The question caught her off guard. She considered it honestly, looking at this large, rough man who could probably break her in half without effort, who nevertheless had set a table and given her escape routes and called kindness by its name. "No," she said finally. "Uncertain, yes. Worried about whether I can manage life out here, absolutely. But not afraid of you specifically." Something in his shoulders relaxed. "That is a start, then. This life is hard, Willa. I will not lie to you about that. The work is dawn to dusk most days, the weather can be brutal, and we are far enough from town that you will be isolated. But if you are willing to try, I will do everything I can to make sure you are safe and cared for." What do you expect from a wife?" she asked, needing to understand the practical realities. "Someone to talk to at the end of the day," he said without hesitation. "Someone to share the work and the small moments. I am not looking for a housekeeper I have to marry to make respectable, Willa. I am looking for a partner." "If that is not what you want, tell me now." The honesty in his words was startling. She had expected demands, a list of duties, perhaps some acknowledgement of the physical expectations of marriage. Instead, he was offering partnership to a woman he had known for less than 4 hours. "I do not know how to be a rancher's wife," she admitted. "I grew up in a city. I can sew and cook basic meals and keep a house, but I have never dealt with cattle or chickens or any of the animals I saw outside. Then I will teach you if you want to learn, or Mrs. Chen can help. She knows everything about running a house out here." He paused, turning his cup in his hands. "I want you to understand something. The marriage license is filed in town, ready for us to sign whenever you are willing, but I am not going to pressure you. Take the time you need to decide if this is a life you can live, if it is a life you want." Willa looked around the kitchen, at the solid walls and the warm stove and the flowers on the table. She thought about the alternative, about returning to Philadelphia and her aunt's grudging charity, about the limited options available to a woman with no family and no money. But more than that, she thought about the man across from her, who wrote poetry and chased cattle and offered freedom in the same breath as proposal. "I would like to try," she said quietly. "Not rush into anything, but try to see if we suit." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise, transforming his rough features into something approaching handsome. "That is all I can ask for." They finished their meal with easier conversation, Quentin telling her about the ranch operations, the seasonal roundups, the men who worked for him. She learned that Miguel had been with him for 3 years, a steady hand with horses. Jack, the other man she had glimpsed, handled most of the farrier work and helped with the cattle. There were 2 others who worked part-time during busy seasons. It was a modest operation, nothing grand, but it was his and he ran it honestly. When the dishes were washed and put away, Quentin excused himself to check on the fence repair, leaving Willa to explore the house more thoroughly. She found his makeshift office in a small room off the sitting area, the desk covered with careful accounts and correspondence. The handwriting in the ledgers matched the letters she had received, that same precise penmanship that had first caught her attention. Here was evidence of the man who wrote poetry, in the careful records and the notes about weather patterns and cattle health. She was examining the bookshelf when he returned, his work finally done for the day. He had washed at the pump outside, his hair damp and slicked back, and he looked younger without the dust and strain. "You like to read," she said, noting the titles. There was Shakespeare and Longfellow alongside practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father," he said. "She made sure we all learned to read and appreciate words. I think that is why I started writing to you the way I did. It felt natural to try to share what this place meant to me through descriptions rather than just facts." "You made it sound magical," Willa said softly, "like something out of a storybook." "It can be," he said, moving to stand beside her, though he kept a respectful distance. "Tomorrow, if you are not too tired from traveling, I will show you the property. Let you see if the reality lives up to the words. I would like that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Quentin cleared his throat. "It has been a long day for you. I should let you rest. If you need anything during the night, I will be in the room at the end of the hall. Do not hesitate to wake me." She nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The journey west had taken days, sleeping in train cars and station hotels, and the emotional weight of this momentous decision was catching up with her. "Good night, Quentin." Good night, Willa. She climbed the stairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and slipped between sheets that smelled of sunshine and lavender. Through the open window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in the corrals, the wind in the oak trees. It was so different from Philadelphia's city noise that it felt like another world entirely. Sleep should have come easily, but instead, she found herself staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man down the hall who had turned out to be nothing and everything she had expected. He was rough, yes, his hands calloused and his manner direct. But there was a core of kindness in him that his appearance could not hide, a gentleness in the way he had offered her choices instead of demands. She thought about his letters, about the words he had crafted so carefully, and wondered which version was the real Quentin Jameson. Then she realized it was probably both, that a person could be rough and kind, direct and poetic, strong and gentle all at once. The question was whether she could learn to live with all those contradictions, whether she could build a life here in this golden valley, so far from everything she had known. Morning came early to the ranch. Willa woke to the sound of roosters and men's voices in the yard, sunlight already streaming through her windows. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and made her way downstairs to find Quentin already gone. But a pot of coffee stayed warm on the stove, and a note in his careful handwriting told her there were eggs in the cold box and bread in the bin. She was attempting to coax the stove into cooperation for frying eggs when the front door opened, and a small Chinese woman entered carrying a basket. The woman stopped, taking in Willa's presence with intelligent dark eyes. "You must be Miss Owens," she said in perfect English with only a slight accent. "I am Mrs. Chen. Mr. Jameson told me yesterday you would be arriving. Please call me Willa," she said, grateful for another woman's presence. "I am afraid I am making a mess of breakfast, Mrs." Chen set down her basket and moved to the stove with the confidence of long familiarity. "The heat needs to be lower for eggs. This stove runs hot. Let me show you." For the next hour, Willa received a practical education in the realities of ranch life. Mrs. Chen showed her how to manage the temperamental stove, where supplies were kept, how to check the cold box that was kept cool with ice from the winter stores. She learned which eggs were fresh, how to tell if milk had turned, and the basics of keeping house in a climate that was nothing like Philadelphia's. "Mr. Jameson is a good man," Mrs. Chen said as they worked together to prepare a proper breakfast. "He has been alone too long. This ranch needs a woman's presence. He seems very capable of managing on his own," Willa observed. "Capable, yes, but lonely." Mrs. Chen gave her a look that was both kind and assessing. His letters were very important to him. He worked on them for hours sometimes, wanting to get the words right. "I think he was afraid of scaring you away if you knew how rough he really is." "He is not what I expected," Willa admitted, "but I do not think I am disappointed, just adjusting." "That is wise." Expectations cause more heartbreak than reality ever does. Mrs. Chen pulled bread from the oven, filling the kitchen with warm, yeasty scent. "Now, when he comes in for breakfast, you will see how much a working man can eat. Do not be alarmed." Quentin appeared 20 minutes later with Miguel and Jack, all three men dusty and clearly already hours into their workday. They stopped at the sight of Willa and Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, and Quentin removed his hat in an automatic gesture of respect. "Morning," he said. "Willa, these are my hands. Miguel Reyes and Jack Patterson. Gentlemen, this is Miss Willa Owens from Philadelphia." Miguel, a lean man with kind eyes and a weathered face, nodded politely. Jack, younger and red-haired with freckles across his nose, grinned openly. "Pleased to meet you, madam. Nice to see this place getting some civilization." "Do not embarrass her," Quentin said mildly, but there was warmth in his tone. "Come on, wash up and eat. We have a full day ahead." The men ate with the focused intensity of people who worked hard physically, and Willa found herself fascinated by the easy camaraderie between them. Quentin was different with his workers, more relaxed, making dry jokes that had Jack laughing and even Miguel cracking smiles. This was another facet of the man, the leader who commanded respect through fairness rather than fear. When the meal was finished and the men returned to their work, Mrs. Chen began teaching Willa the specifics of the household routine. She learned about laundry, about preserving food for winter, about the chickens that needed tending and the garden that struggled in the California heat, but produced enough vegetables to supplement their meals. "Mr. Jameson said he would show me the ranch today," Willa mentioned as they worked. "Then you will need different shoes," Mrs. Chen said practically. "Those city boots will not do for walking through pastures. There are spare boots by the back door, probably too large but better than ruining your good shoes. And wear a bonnet. The sun here is not like Eastern sun. It will burn you before you know it." Thus equipped, Willa felt more prepared when Quentin came to collect her after lunch. He had cleaned up, changing into a less dusty shirt, and he studied her borrowed boots with approval. "Mrs. Chen is teaching you well," he said. "Come on, I will saddle a gentle horse for you if you know how to ride, or we can take the wagon if you prefer." "I can ride," Willa said, though it had been years since she had been on a horse, "but perhaps something very gentle to start." He led her to the barn where a placid mare stood in one of the stalls, already saddled. "This is Rosie. She is old enough to have grandchildren if horses work that way, but she is steady and she knows the property. She will take care of you." Mounting was less graceful than Willa would have liked, but Quentin steadied the horse and did not comment on her awkwardness. He swung up onto his own mount, a tall gelding that looked like it could run for days, and they started out at a slow walk. The ranch spread across more land than Willa had realized. Quentin showed her the boundaries, the creek that provided water, the different pastures where cattle grazed in segregated groups. He explained about calving season, about the dangers of drought, about his hopes to expand the breeding program if he could afford better bulls. "It is not fancy," he said as they paused on a rise that overlooked the valley, "but it is good land, and the cattle are healthy. We make enough to keep going, pay the hands, and save a bit for emergencies. It is an honest living. You love it," Willa observed, watching his face as he surveyed his domain. "I do. This land has been in my family for 20 years. My father got it when he came west after the war, built everything from nothing. Losing my family almost made me give it up, but I could not abandon what they had built, what they had dreamed about." "The war," she said carefully. "You mean the war between the states," he nodded. "My father fought for the Union. Came west after because he said he had seen enough of the South and the East both. He wanted space and clean air and a chance to build something new." He glanced at her. "What about your people?" "My father was too old to fight, but he lost his business during the war. He never recovered financially. That is why there was nothing left when he died." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Your advertisement was not the first I answered. But you were the first who seemed to want a partner rather than just a housekeeper or a broodmare." His jaw tightened. "Any man who treats a woman like that is not a man at all." They rode in silence for a while, and Willa felt something shift between them, a tentative understanding beginning to form. He was showing her his world, trusting her with the dreams he had for this land, and she was offering him pieces of her truth in return. "Tell me about the town," she said eventually. "About Red Bluff itself." "It is small but growing. We have a general store, a bank, a church, a doctor, a blacksmith, and 2 saloons. There are maybe 300 people living in town and more scattered on ranches and farms around the area. It is nothing like Philadelphia, I am sure. That might not be a bad thing, she admitted. Philadelphia has opportunities, but it also has rigid expectations. Every social interaction felt like a test I was failing. You would not be judged so harshly here, Quentin said. Frontier towns are more interested in whether you pull your weight than whether you know which fork to use. I think I can learn to pull my weight, Willa said, more confident than she felt. They returned to the ranch house as the sun began its descent, and Quentin helped her dismount, his hands gentle despite their roughness. "Thank you for showing me everything," she said. "It helps to understand what my life might be like here." "This is only part of it," he warned. "I showed you the pretty aspects today. There is hard work and heartbreak too. Animals die, weather destroys crops, people get hurt. It is not always golden hills and sunset rides. No life is perfect, Quentin. At least here I would be building something rather than just surviving day to day." He studied her face, and she saw hope kindle in his eyes. "You are thinking about staying, then?" "I am thinking about giving this a real chance," she corrected. "We still barely know each other." "Then let us fix that," he said. "Come sit on the porch with me. I will tell you every terrible thing about myself, and you can decide if you can live with it." They sat on the porch as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and Quentin was as good as his word. He told her about his temper, which was slow to rise but hot when it did. He told her about the times he had failed, about cattle he had lost to his own poor judgment, about the loneliness that sometimes made him wonder if he should have followed his brother to the city. He told her about his fears that he was too rough, too direct, too much a creature of this wild land to make a woman from the civilized East happy. In return, Willa told him about her own failings, about the pride that had made her resist her aunt's charity even when she had nowhere else to turn. She told him about her fear of being useless, of not being strong enough for frontier life. She admitted that she sometimes woke in the night wondering if she had made a terrible mistake coming west. "But then I think about the alternative," she said softly. "About being dependent on family who did not want me, about growing old as someone's poor relation. At least here, I have a chance to be something more." "You already are something more," Quentin said firmly. "You got on a train and crossed a continent to meet a stranger. That takes courage most people do not have, or desperation. Sometimes those amount to the same thing." He shifted in his chair, and she could see him working up to something. "Willa, I know we just met, but I want you to know my intentions. I am not playing games or trying to trap you into something you do not want. If we marry, I want it to be because we both choose it, because we think we can build something good together. And if we do not marry, I still want you to have a future. I meant what I said about helping you get established elsewhere if that is what you want." The setting sun cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the small scar above his eyebrow she had not noticed before. He was not handsome in a conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, something solid and real that made her heart beat faster. "Ask me again in a week," she said impulsively. "Give me time to see if I can manage the work, if I can adapt to this life. Then ask me to marry you properly, and I will give you an honest answer." He turned to look at her, surprise and something warmer flickering in his expression. "A week. I can do that." The week that followed was a revelation in exhaustion and discovery. Mrs. Chen came daily, patient in her instruction as Willa learned the 1,000 small skills necessary for ranch life. She learned to read the temperamental stove's moods, to preserve fruit in jars, to make bread that did not turn into doorstops. She learned to collect eggs without frightening the chickens, to pump water efficiently, to to hang laundry so the ever-present wind helped rather than hindered. But more importantly, she learned to watch Quentin. She observed how he treated his workers with respect, paying them fairly and listening to their concerns. She saw his gentleness with animals, the way he could calm a spooked horse or check an injured calf without causing additional distress. She witnessed his temper only once, when he discovered someone had been cutting his fence wire to let cattle stray. And even then, it was a cold, controlled anger rather than explosive rage. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch or in the sitting room, and he told her stories about the land and its history. He read to her from his books, his rough voice somehow perfect for poetry. She learned that he played harmonica, though not well, and that he had a habit of talking to his horse like the animal could understand complex explanations. She also learned that he was terrible at expressing his feelings directly, that he showed care through actions rather than words. He brought her wildflowers without comment, left books he thought she might enjoy on her bedside table, fixed the loose floorboard in her room before she even mentioned it squeaked. Every gesture was small, but together they painted a picture of a man who was trying desperately to make her comfortable. On the fourth day, a neighbor stopped by, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson who ran the ranch to the south with her 2 grown sons. She looked Willa up and down with shrewd eyes before pronouncing, "Well, you are prettier than I expected from the way Quentin described you. He said you were pleasant-looking, the fool. Trying not to brag, I suppose, Mrs. Henderson," Quentin said with barely concealed embarrassment. "Should you not be checking on your own ranch? My boys can manage for an afternoon. I came to meet your bride-to-be and make sure she knows what she is getting into." The older woman settled at the kitchen table as though she belonged there. "Girl, has he told you about the rattlesnakes yet?" "Rattlesnakes?" Willa felt her stomach drop. "They come out in summer, looking for cool spots. You have to check your boots before putting them on, shake out blankets before sleeping. Lost a hand to snakebite 3 years ago because the fool did not check his bedroll." "That was on your ranch, Mrs. Henderson," Quentin pointed out dryly. "Same principle applies everywhere." She turned back to Willa. "And the mountain lions. You do not go walking alone at dusk or dawn. They are more afraid of you than you are of them mostly, but a hungry lion is not particular." By the time Mrs. Henderson left, Willa's head was spinning with dire warnings about everything from flash floods to poison oak. Quentin looked apologetic. "She means well," he said. "In her way. She is trying to prepare you for reality." "She is trying to scare me," Willa corrected, but there was no heat in her words. "Does she think I will run? Probably. She has seen a lot of Eastern brides fail to adapt. I think she is testing whether you have staying power." "You think I have staying power?" He met her eyes squarely. "I think you have more strength than you give yourself credit for. You have not complained once this week, even though I know Mrs. Chen has been working you hard. You have learned fast and adapted to things that would send most city women screaming back to the train station. So yes, Willa, I think you have staying power." The confidence in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest. She had been uncertain of so many things since arriving, but his belief in her felt like solid ground beneath uncertain feet. On the 6th day, disaster struck in a small way that nonetheless tested everything. Willa was in the garden, trying to remember Mrs. Chen's instructions about which plants were vegetables and which were weeds, when she heard shouting from the direction of the barn. She ran toward the sound, arriving to find Miguel on the ground, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, and Jack trying to calm a panicked horse. "What happened?" she demanded, her city sensibilities forgotten in the urgency of the moment. "Horse spooked," Jack said tersely. "Miguel got kicked trying to calm him down," Quentin came running from the far pasture, taking in the situation at a glance. "Jack, get that horse into the far corral away from the others. Willa, can you help me get Miguel to the house?" She did not hesitate, moving to support the injured man's other side as Quentin took his weight. Miguel was conscious but dazed, blood making his face a scary mask. They got him to the kitchen, and Willa found herself drawing on half-remembered lessons from tending her father in his final illness. "We need clean water and bandages," she said, already moving to the stove to heat water. "Mrs. Chen showed me where the medical supplies are kept." For the next hour, she worked alongside Quentin to clean and bandage Miguel's wound. It looked worse than it was, head wounds bleeding freely, but he had a substantial cut that would need stitching. "I can ride to town for the doctor," Jack offered, hovering anxiously. "That would take hours," Willa said, examining the wound critically. She looked at Quentin. "Can you sew it?" "I have stitched up animals, never a person." He looked uncertain the first time she had seen him, truly doubtful. "I have sewn my share of wounds," Miguel said groggily. "Talk me through it and I will instruct, but you will need steady hands." They both looked at Willa. She felt her stomach rebel at the idea but pushed the queasiness down. "Show me what to do." With Miguel's occasional directions and Quentin steadying the needle, Willa stitched up her first human wound. Her hands shook, and she felt sick twice, but she kept going until the gash was closed and properly bandaged. Only then did she excuse herself to the porch, where she sat down hard and tried not to cry from the release of tension. Quentin found her there 10 minutes later. He sat beside her without speaking, and when she finally looked at him, she saw respect and something warmer in his expression. "You did good work," he said simply. "I felt like I was going to faint the entire time. But you did not. You did what needed doing, even though you were scared." "That is the definition of courage, Willa." "It was awful," she said honestly. "The blood, the needle going through skin, all of it." "Yes, it is, but life out here sometimes demands awful things, and you met the challenge." He hesitated, then carefully took her hand in his rough palm warm against her skin. "You are going to be all right here, better than all right." She let herself lean against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. They sat like that as the sun climbed higher, neither speaking, the contact between them saying more than words could manage. That evening, with Miguel resting in the bunkhouse under Jack's watchful eye, Quentin and Willa ate a quiet supper together. She found herself watching him across the table, this rough man with gentle hands who had trusted her with his injured workers' care. The letters that had brought her west seemed like artifacts from another lifetime, pretty words that had been true but incomplete. "Tomorrow is a week," Quentin said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "I will not hold you to what you said if you need more time." Willa set down her fork and looked at him directly. "I do not need more time. Ask me." He went very still. "Willa Owens, will you marry me?" "Not because you have no other choice, but because you think we can build something good together. Because you are willing to take a chance on a rough cowboy who is better with a pen than he is with pretty words spoken out loud." "Yes," she said, the answer coming easily now that she had seen him in crisis and calm, in kindness and in strength. "Yes, I will marry you, Quentin Jameson." The smile that transformed his face was worth every moment of uncertainty. He reached across the table, and she gave him her hand, feeling the calluses that she now understood came from honest work, seeing the gentleness in how he held her as though she were something precious. "We can go to town tomorrow," he said. "Sign the papers, have the preacher say the words if you want a ceremony, or we can wait if you prefer." "Tomorrow," she said firmly. "I have spent too much of my life waiting for the right moment. This feels right enough." They married in Red Bluff the next afternoon in the small church with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses. Quentin wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable but determined. Willa wore her best dress and felt a strange calm settle over her as she spoke her vows. This was not the romantic wedding she had imagined as a girl, but it was real and honest, and the man promising to love and cherish her meant every word with an intensity that took her breath away. The preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Quentin kissed her carefully, respectfully, the barest brush of lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. Then they were walking out into the afternoon sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Jameson, and the reality of what she had done hit her with delayed force. "Are you all right?" Quentin asked quietly as they stood by the wagon. "I just married a man I met a week ago," she said, halfway between laughter and tears. "I think I am allowed a moment of panic." "Panic all you need to," he said steadily. "But know that I meant every word I said in there. You are my wife now, Willa, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that gift." Mrs. Henderson insisted on hosting a small celebration dinner at the general store, where what seemed like half the town turned out to meet the new Mrs. Jameson. Willa was introduced to more people than she could hope to remember, including the stern bank manager, the friendly general store owner, and a young woman named Sarah who ran the town's small school. "Finally, another woman near my own age," Sarah said warmly. "You must come to tea next week. I am dying to hear about Philadelphia. I came from Ohio 2 years ago, and I still miss having someone to talk to about back east." Willa found herself relaxing into the community's welcome, surprised by how genuinely friendly everyone seemed. This was nothing like Philadelphia's rigid social structure, where every interaction was fraught with judgment about status and propriety. By the time they drove back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, she felt overwhelmed but cautiously happy. Quentin handled the horses with easy competence, and the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward. "Are you worried about tonight?" he asked as they approached the house. She knew what he was really asking. "A little," she admitted. "I do not know what to expect." He helped her down from the wagon, but this time he did not immediately release her. "Then, let me make it simple. This is our wedding night, yes, but I am not going to demand anything you are not ready to give. We are married legally now, but we can take our time with the rest. I want you to be comfortable with me, Willa, not frightened or resentful." The relief that flooded through her must have shown on her face because he smiled slightly. "Did you think I would turn into a brute just because we signed papers?" "I did not know what to think," she confessed. "My aunt gave me dire warnings about marital duties and men's expectations." "Your aunt sounds like she did not have a happy marriage." He touched her face gently, his work-roughened thumb brushing her cheek. "I want us to be happy together, and that means both of us need to be willing participants in everything we do. So tonight, we will sleep in our own rooms like we have been doing, and when you are ready for more, you can tell me." She reached up impulsively and kissed him, a quick press of lips that was braver than she felt. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to say yes." Over the following weeks, Willa settled into her new life with a mix of determination and growing confidence. The work was relentless, but satisfying in a way her previous idle existence had never been. She learned to read the weather, to understand the cattle's needs, to manage the household with increasing competence. Mrs. Chen remained a steady teacher and was becoming a genuine friend, sharing stories of her own journey from China and the hardships she had faced building a life in California. Quentin proved to be a constant surprise. His patience with her learning curve seemed endless, and his pride in her accomplishments, small though they were, was genuine. He showed her how to ride properly, how to rope fence posts for repair, how to spot illness in cattle before it spread. In the evenings, they sat together and talked about everything and nothing, building the foundation of real friendship beneath the legal bonds of marriage. But there was also growing awareness between them, a tension that was not unpleasant, but made itself known in lingering glances and careful touches. Willa found herself noticing things about him she had not paid attention to before. The way his shoulders moved when he worked, the rare, full smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness in his hands despite their roughness. She caught him watching her too when he thought she was not paying attention, and the heat in those looks made her breath catch. He never pushed, never demanded, but the desire was there on both sides, building slowly like a summer storm gathering on the horizon. It was Mrs. Henderson, of all people, who finally addressed the elephant in the room. She stopped by one afternoon when Quentin was out checking fence lines, settling at the kitchen table with the presumption of someone who had decided to meddle. "You two are dancing around each other like nervous colts," she announced without preamble. "You are married, girl. It is allowed." Willa felt heat flood her face. "That is a very personal observation, Mrs. Henderson. Personal but necessary. I like Quentin, always have. He is a good man who has been alone too long, and I can see the way you look at him when you think no one notices. So what is holding you back?" "I barely know him," Willa protested weakly. "You have been living with him for nearly a month. You know him better than most brides know their grooms on their wedding night. If you are waiting for some magical moment of perfect certainty, it does not exist. Marriage is taking a chance and working to make that chance pay off." "I do not want to disappoint him," Willa admitted quietly. "I have no experience with any of this." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. "Neither did he, if that helps. His parents died before he could court anyone properly, and he has been too busy keeping the ranch going to pursue women in town. You are both fumbling through this together, which is probably the best way to start." She stood, preparing to leave. "Stop thinking so much and start feeling. You will both be happier." That night, Willa lay in her bed thinking about Mrs. Henderson's words. She could hear Quentin moving around in his room down the hall, the familiar sounds of him preparing for sleep. They were married, legally and spiritually joined, but still maintaining this careful distance. Was she ready to close that gap? She found herself rising before she could overthink the decision, padding down the hall in her nightgown and bare feet. She knocked softly on his door, heard his surprised response, and opened it before she could lose her nerve. Quentin sat on the edge of his bed, wearing only his trousers, his torso bare in the lamplight. She had never seen him without a shirt, and the sight made her mouth go dry. He was all lean muscle and sun-darkened skin, evidence of hard physical labor written across his body in a way that was undeniably appealing. "Willa," he said, concern in his voice. "Is something wrong?" "No," she managed. "Nothing is wrong, I just Mrs. Henderson said we were dancing around each other, and she is right. We are married, Quentin, and I am tired of being scared of what that means." He stood slowly, moving toward her with careful steps as though approaching a skittish horse. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I want to be your wife in truth, not just in name." The words came out braver than she felt. "If you still want that." "If I still want Willa, I have wanted that since the moment you stepped off that train, but I need you to be sure. This is not something we can take back." "I am sure," she said, and realized she meant it. This rough, kind man had shown her nothing but patience and respect. If she could not trust him with this, she could not trust anyone. "Show me what comes next." He closed the distance between them, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "We can go slow," he promised. "If anything scares you or hurts, you tell me and we stop. This should be good for both of us." Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was heat and need carefully controlled, his mouth moving over hers with a thoroughness that made her knees weak. She clutched at his bare shoulders for balance, feeling the strength in him, the careful restraint. What followed was a revelation in trust and sensation. Quentin was endlessly patient, taking time to show her pleasure before seeking his own, making sure she was comfortable at every step. There was awkwardness, inevitable when two inexperienced people came together, but there was also surprising sweetness and laughter when things did not go quite as expected. Afterward, lying in his arms with the lamp turned low, Willa felt fundamentally changed. Not in the ways her aunt had warned about, all dire predictions of duty and endurance. Instead, she felt closer to this man who was her husband, more connected in a way that went beyond the physical. "Are you all right?" Quentin asked, his rough voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "I am better than all right," she said honestly. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me in." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You can go back to your room if you want, or you can stay here, whatever makes you comfortable." She nestled closer to him, feeling safe in a way she had not experienced since her parents died. "I think I will stay if that is acceptable, more than acceptable." His arms tightened around her. "This is where you belong, Willa, here with me." She fell asleep listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong beneath her ear, and woke the next morning to find herself still wrapped in his embrace. The dawn light streaming through the windows painted everything gold, and when she shifted, his eyes opened, blue and warm with contentment. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, husband." His smile was like sunrise. "I like hearing you say that." The following months brought their own challenges and joys as summer gave way to fall. Willa continued learning the ranch's rhythms, growing more confident in her abilities. She made friends with Sarah from town, who proved to be a kindred spirit, and even won over Mrs. Henderson with her determination and willingness to work hard. Her relationship with Quentin deepened in ways she had not anticipated. They developed their own routines, their own private jokes and shared understanding. She learned to read his moods from the set of his shoulders, to know when he needed companionship and when he needed space to work through problems on his own. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that her quiet determination could move mountains when properly applied. They had their first real fight in October, when Quentin made a decision about selling cattle without consulting her. She confronted him at dinner, angry that he had not included her in something that affected their livelihood. "I have been making these decisions alone for years," he said defensively. "I did not think you would want to be bothered with business details." "I am your partner," she shot back. "You said you wanted a partner, not just a housekeeper." "That means including me in important decisions, even the business ones." They argued, voices rising, until Quentin finally threw up his hands. "You are right. I am sorry. I am not used to answering to anyone, and I should have consulted you." The fight cleared the air between them, establishing new boundaries and expectations. From that point forward, Quentin made a point of discussing major decisions with her, and Willa found herself becoming genuinely interested in the ranch's business operations. As fall turned toward winter, they received word that Miguel's wife was finally joining him from Mexico, and Quentin offered to let the couple take one of the smaller houses on the property. Willa helped prepare the place, and when Rosa Reyes arrived, she found another friend in the warm, practical woman who spoke limited English but communicated perfectly through gestures and laughter. Winter brought its own challenges. The work changed, focusing on maintaining the herd through colder weather, repairing equipment for spring, and preparing for the next calving season. The house, which had seemed spacious in summer, became a cozy haven where Willa and Quentin spent long evenings by the fire, reading or playing cards or simply talking. It was during one of these evenings that Willa realized she had fallen in love with her husband. Not the tentative affection of those first weeks, but deep, abiding love that made her heart ache with fullness when she looked at him. He was reading aloud from Longfellow, his rough voice somehow perfect for the poetry, and lamplight painted gold highlights in his dark hair. She loved his seriousness and his rare smiles, his gentleness and his strength, his honesty and his patience. She must have made some sound because he looked up, concern immediate in his expression. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I am just very happy, and I wanted you to know that. Coming here, marrying you, it was the best decision I ever made." He set the book aside and pulled her close, and she could feel emotion trembling through him. "I feel the same way. You changed everything for me, Willa. This house was just a place I lived before you came. Now it is a home." They sat wrapped together as the fire burned low, and Willa thought about how much had changed in a handful of months. She had come west with one bag and a heart full of uncertainty, and she had found a life beyond anything she could have imagined. The cowboy had indeed been rougher than his letters suggested, all calloused hands and direct speech, but he was also infinitely kinder, more patient, more devoted than mere words on paper could ever convey. Winter deepened, and with it came news from town that changed everything. Sarah stopped by one December afternoon, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry. "There is a man asking questions about you in town," she said without preamble. "Says he is your cousin, looking to make sure you are all right." Willa felt cold wash through her. "I do not have any cousins. My father was an only child, and my mother's family all died in a fever outbreak when I was young." Sarah and Quentin exchanged glances. "Then who is this man?" Quentin asked. "I do not know, but he has been asking the bank manager about your accounts, trying to find out if you own anything of value." Sarah looked apologetic. Mr. Morrison did not tell him anything, but the man was persistent. "Could it be related to your father's debts?" Quentin asked Willa. "Someone thinking there might be money to collect. There was nothing left. The creditors took everything." But even as she said it, Willa remembered something her aunt had mentioned once, about a trust her grandmother had established that was supposed to pass to her when she turned 23. She had forgotten about it in the chaos of leaving Philadelphia, had assumed it was another thing lost to debt. "I turn 23 next month," she said slowly. "There was supposed to be a trust, but I thought it was gone." Quentin's jaw set in a hard line. "Perhaps it was not, and someone is trying to get to it before you can claim it." They spent an anxious week waiting to see if the mysterious man would appear at the ranch. Quentin made sure one of the hands was always close to the house, and he taught Willa how to handle a rifle just in case. The protective fury in him was almost frightening, but it also made her feel cherished in a way that went beyond words. The man finally appeared on a cold January morning, arriving in a hired buggy and presenting himself as Thomas Owen, claiming to be her father's cousin and therefore her family. He was slick and well-dressed, with calculating eyes that made Willa's skin crawl. "My dear cousin," he said with false warmth, "I have been searching for you ever since your aunt wrote that you had run off west. We were all so worried." "My aunt knew exactly where I was," Willa said coldly, standing on her porch with Quentin a solid presence beside her. "I wrote her before I left, and my father never mentioned a cousin named Thomas." "We had a falling out years ago," Thomas said smoothly. "But family is family, and I felt responsible for making sure you were safe. Imagine my relief to find you well married and established. I just want to help you claim your inheritance so you can live more comfortably." "What inheritance?" Quentin asked bluntly. Thomas hesitated, clearly not expecting the question. The trust her grandmother established. It matures on her 23rd birthday, a not inconsiderable sum. I have been managing it since her father's death. Funny that you never mentioned this trust to me, Willa said. In fact, no one did. How did you even know about it? Your aunt mentioned it in her letter asking me to find you. But there was something off in his tone, something that made Willa certain he was lying. I think you should leave, Quentin said, moving to stand slightly in front of Willa. If there is a trust, my wife can claim it through legal channels. She does not need your help. Thomas's pleasant expression slipped. Now see here, I am her family. She should not be listening to some rough cowboy over her own blood. This rough cowboy is her husband, which gives me more claim than a supposed cousin she has never heard of. Quentin's voice was dangerously quiet. Leave our property now, or I will have you removed. Thomas looked between them, clearly calculating his odds. Whatever he saw in Quentin's expression made him back down. Very well, but you are making a mistake, cousin. That money could set you up for life. After he left, Willa sagged against Quentin, feeling shaky with adrenaline. Do you think there really is a trust? I think we need to send a telegram to Philadelphia and find out, Quentin said grimly. If there is money, it is yours by right, but I am not letting some stranger claim any part of you or what you own. They rode to town that afternoon, and Quentin composed a careful telegram to the law firm that had handled her father's estate. Then there was nothing to do but wait for a response. It came a week later, a letter from a lawyer confirming that yes, there was indeed a trust established by Willa's maternal grandmother. It was supposed to pass to Willa on her 23rd birthday, which was now only weeks away. The amount was substantial, enough to expand the ranch significantly or provide security for years to come. But the lawyer also confirmed that Thomas Owen was not related to Willa's family in any way. He was a clerk who had worked briefly for the law firm and had apparently stolen information about the trust before being dismissed for dishonesty. He was trying to get you to sign the trust over to him, Quentin said, reading the letter with mounting anger. Probably would have convinced you that you needed his help to access it, gotten you to sign papers, and disappeared with your money. Willa felt sick at how close she had come to disaster. If Thomas had found her before she married, when she was desperate and alone, she might have believed his lies. What do we do now? We contact the sheriff, let him know there is a con man working the area, and we make sure the trust is transferred properly into your name. Quentin looked at her seriously. This is your money, Willa. I want you to understand that. It is yours to do with as you wish. It is our money, she corrected. We are married. What is mine is yours. Legally, yes, but I want you to have security of your own. If anything ever happened to me, I want to know you would be provided for. He took her hands. Use some of it to expand the ranch if you want, but keep the rest separate, for your future. She loved him fiercely in that moment, this rough man who was giving her freedom even as he bound himself to her. We will expand the ranch together, she said firmly. That is what partners do. Her 23rd birthday arrived in February, and with it came legal confirmation that the trust was now hers. The amount was enough to make her gasp when she saw the official papers. She and Quentin spent several evenings discussing what to do with it, weighing options and possibilities. In the end, they decided to use a portion to buy additional land adjacent to their property, expanding the ranch significantly. Another portion went into savings for emergencies and future growth. And a smaller amount Willa kept separate, using it to establish a small lending library in Red Bluff and to help Sarah expand the town school. You do not have to give money away, Quentin said when he saw her plans. I want to, Willa said simply. This town welcomed me when I had nothing. Now I can give something back. Spring brought calving season, and with it came the busiest time of year on the ranch. Willa found herself working dawn to dusk alongside Quentin and the hands, helping with difficult births, caring for newborn calves, managing the chaos of new life everywhere. It was exhausting and messy and occasionally heartbreaking when they lost an animal, but it was also deeply satisfying one morning as she stood watching the sun rise over pastures full of cattle and calves. Quentin came to stand beside her. "Happy?" he asked simply. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "A year ago I was desperate and alone in Philadelphia with no future and no hope. Now look at me covered in dust and animal hair, exhausted from work and so grateful I could cry." "I am the grateful one," Quentin said, pulling her close despite her protests about being dirty. "You took a chance on me when you had every reason to refuse. You have made this ranch, this life, into something worth living instead of just surviving." She tilted her face up to kiss him, tasting dust and happiness. "We did it together." Summer came again, marking a full year since her arrival, and Willa took stock of how much had changed. She was no longer the uncertain city woman who had stepped off the train with one bag. She was a rancher's wife, a partner in a growing business, a member of a community. She could ride, rope, deliver calves, keep accounts, and shoot straight enough to scare off predators. The work had toughened her hands and darkened her skin, and she looked nothing like the pale Philadelphia girl she had been. But more than the physical changes, she had found something she had never expected, a place where she belonged, work that mattered, and a love that grounded her even as it lifted her up. The letters that had brought her west had been beautiful, but they had only hinted at the reality. The cowboy was indeed rougher than his words. His hands were calloused, his manner direct, his world full of hard work and real dangers. But he was also infinitely kinder than paper could convey, showing his love through patient teaching, unwavering support, and the thousand small gestures that made a house into a home. In July, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Quentin at dinner, watching nervousness and joy war across his expressive face. "Are you happy about it?" he asked carefully. "I know we have not talked much about children." "I am terrified and delighted in equal measure," she admitted. "But yes, I am happy. Are you?" His smile answered before his words did. "I cannot wait to meet our child, to see what we create together." The pregnancy progressed through summer and into fall, and Willa found herself constantly surprised by Quentin's attentiveness. He insisted she reduce her workload, taking on tasks she had been handling so she could rest more. He brought her strange foods she craved, read to her when she could not sleep, and held her when she cried for no reason except that her emotions were overwhelming. "I am being ridiculous," she said one evening after crying over a sunset. "You are growing our child," Quentin said firmly. "You can cry over whatever you want." Their daughter was born in March of 1876, on a day when spring was just beginning to touch the valley with green. The birth was long and hard, with Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Henderson attending since the doctor was delayed by a storm. Willa thought she might die from the pain, but then she heard the first thin cry, and nothing else mattered. Quentin was allowed in only after everything was cleaned up, and Willa would never forget the expression on his face when he saw his daughter for the first time. He approached the bed as though walking on sacred ground, his rough hands gentle as he touched the baby's tiny fingers. "She is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe I get to have this." They named her Rose, for the flower and for the old mare that had taught Willa to ride. Rose Jameson came into the world squalling and red-faced, and she immediately became the center of their universe. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Quentin proved to be a natural father, handling their tiny daughter with the same careful gentleness he showed with newborn calves. Willa watched him walk the floor at night, singing to Rose in his rough voice, and fell in love with him all over again. "I never thought I would have this," Quentin confessed one night as they sat together watching their daughter sleep. "After my family died, I convinced myself I would always be alone. Then you stepped off that train and everything changed." "I came west with one bag and no hope," Willa said softly. "I found a partner who was rougher and kinder than I ever imagined. I found a home, a family, a life worth living." "You gave me all of that, Quentin." "We gave it to each other," he corrected, pulling her close. "Partnership, remember?" Rose grew through that first year, thriving in the ranch environment. She was a sunny-natured child who seemed equally happy being carried around the property in a sling while her parents worked or playing on a blanket in the shade, while Willa tended the garden. The ranch hands doted on her, especially Miguel and Rosa, who announced that summer that they were expecting their own child. Red Bluff continued to grow, and with it, the sense of community deepened. Willa's lending library became a popular gathering spot, and she found herself at the center of the town's social life. Sarah remained her closest friend, but she also developed relationships with the other ranch wives, the shopkeepers, even the stern bank manager who proved to have a soft spot for baby Rose. The ranch prospered too. The additional land they had purchased allowed them to expand the herd, and Quentin's careful breeding program began to pay off with healthier cattle that commanded better prices. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, able to save for the future and help others when needed. When Rose was 2, Willa found herself pregnant again, and their son came into the world in the spring of 1879 with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Samuel, after Quentin's father, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Watching Quentin with their children, seeing the gentleness with which he handled their tiny bodies, Willa often thought about how deceiving first impressions could be. This man who looked so rough, who had seemed so intimidating stepping across that train platform, was the most nurturing father she could imagine. He read stories every night, taught Rose to ride before she was 3, carried Samuel in a pack while working so the baby could be close to him. His letters had hinted at poetry and sensitivity, but the reality was so much richer than words could convey. Years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work and family life. Rose grew into a bright, curious child who wanted to know everything about the ranch operations. Samuel was quieter but equally determined, following his father everywhere and mimicking his mannerisms. The ranch continued to expand, and Quentin began mentoring younger ranchers, sharing the knowledge his father had passed to him. Willa found her own rhythm too, balancing motherhood with her work on the ranch and in the community. She discovered she had a talent for negotiation, and she began handling some of the ranch's business dealings, earning respect from men who had initially dismissed her as just a city woman playing at ranch life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised her by planning a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Miguel and Rosa, who now had 3 children of their own and ran a portion of the ranch as partners. It was the first time Willa and Quentin had been alone together for more than a few hours since Rose was born. "I wanted to show you something beyond the ranch," Quentin said as they checked into a hotel that was fancier than anything Willa had experienced even in Philadelphia. "To thank you for 10 years of partnership." They spent 3 days exploring the city, and Willa saw another side of her husband. He was comfortable in the city, more polished than she expected, able to navigate social situations with a grace that surprised her. When she mentioned it, he laughed. "I told you I went to school," he said. "My mother made sure we could function in civilized society even though we lived on a ranch. I just prefer the ranch life. Simpler, more honest. You are full of surprises, Quentin Jameson. I hope to keep surprising you for the next 50 years, Mrs. Jameson." They returned to the ranch refreshed and even more connected, ready to dive back into the beautiful chaos of family life. Rose was 6 now and determined to learn everything about ranching. Samuel at 4 was equally determined to keep up with his older sister. The house was full of noise and energy and love, so different from the quiet emptiness it had held when Willa first arrived. More years passed, bringing changes both joyful and difficult. Mrs. Henderson passed away at 78, leaving her ranch to her sons but leaving Willa her mother's recipe book and a note that said simply, "You proved me wrong about Eastern brides. Take care of our town." Willa discovered she was pregnant again at 35, a surprise that left her and Quentin both shocked and delighted. Their third child, a daughter they named Grace, was born when Rose was 12 and Samuel was 10, bringing new life to the family. "We are starting over," Quentin said, holding the baby with the same wonder he had shown with their first. "We are expanding," Willa corrected. "There is a difference." Rose proved to be a natural with cattle, showing the same instincts her father had. By the time she was 15, she was working alongside him as a full partner in the ranch operations. Samuel was gentler, more interested in the business side of ranching, and Quentin encouraged both of them to follow their interests rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. "They should have choices," he said to Willa, "the way we did when we chose each other." Grace grew up spoiled by her older siblings and doted on by her parents, a sunny child who seemed to find joy in everything. Watching her play in the garden that Willa had tended for so many years, watching Quentin teach her to identify wildflowers, Willa felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "What are you thinking?" Quentin asked, coming to stand beside her as they watched their youngest daughter pick flowers. "I am thinking about a frightened woman who stepped off a train 17 years ago with nothing but one bag and a handful of letters," Willa said. "I am thinking about how much I have been given since then." "You gave as much as you received," Quentin said, putting his arm around her shoulders. "You turned a house into a home, a lonely man into a husband and father, a struggling ranch into a thriving business. You built a life here, Willa, brick by brick, day by day." "We built it together," she corrected, using the phrase that had become their touchstone over the years. "Partnership, remember," he kissed her temple, a gesture so familiar and comfortable that it made her heart ache. "Best partnership I ever made." Rose married at 21, choosing a young rancher from the next valley over who understood her love for the land. The wedding was held at the ranch, with what seemed like the entire county in attendance. Willa watched her daughter take her vows and thought about her own wedding, so simple and hasty, and marveled at how different their situations were. Rose was marrying for love, but also with security, education, and the full support of her family. She had choices that Willa had never dreamed of at that age. "You gave her that," Quentin said quietly, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "Your courage in coming west, in taking a chance on a stranger, gave her a life full of possibilities." Samuel chose to attend college in San Francisco, studying business so he could help modernize the ranch's operations. It was hard to see him go, but Willa was proud of his ambition and determination. Grace, now a spirited 8-year-old, declared that she would never leave the ranch, that she would stay forever and help her parents. "You might change your mind when you are older," Willa said with amusement. "I will not," Grace said with absolute certainty. This is the best place in the whole world. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and new challenges and constant change. The ranch expanded further, becoming one of the most respected operations in the region. Quentin began to slow down in his 50s, not as quick to mount a horse or chase stray cattle, but he remained involved in every aspect of the business. Willa found herself taking on more of the daily management, surprising herself with how naturally it came. "You have turned into quite the rancher," Quentin observed one evening as they went over the books together. "I had a good teacher," Willa replied. "A rough cowboy who believed I could learn even when I did not believe it myself." They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family Rose with her husband and 3 children. Samuel home from San Francisco with a wife he had met at college, and Grace who had indeed never left the ranch and showed no signs of changing her mind. The house that had once been so quiet now overflowed with noise and life and love. That night, after everyone had finally gone to bed, Willa and Quentin sat on their porch in the darkness, listening to the familiar night sounds of the ranch. She reached for his hand, feeling the calluses that had never gone away, the strength that remained despite the years. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Placing that advertisement, bringing a city woman to the middle of nowhere?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, the best decision I ever made. Even though I knew nothing about ranch life, even though I was terrified half the time, especially because of that. You were brave enough to take a chance, strong enough to learn, stubborn enough to stay even when things were hard. You made me a better man, Willa. You made this life worth living." She thought about the letters that had brought her west, the careful words that had painted pictures of this land. "You wrote that the spring meadows were full of wildflowers," she said softly. "That the morning light gilded the river, that the air was clean and the work was honest." "All true," he said, "but you did not write about the rattlesnakes or the mountain lions or the backbreaking labor. You did not mention the loneliness or the fear or the 1,000 ways ranch life could break a person." "Would you have come if I had?" She considered it honestly. "Probably not. I was desperate, but I was not suicidal." He laughed, the sound as rough and warm as it had been that first day. "Then I am glad I wrote about the flowers instead of the snakes." "The reality turned out to be better than the letters anyway," Willa said. "You were rougher than your words suggested, yes. More direct, less refined, absolutely nothing like the gentleman I had imagined. But you were also kinder than any letter could convey. You showed me what partnership really meant. You taught me that love is not pretty words but consistent action. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible." "We gave each other that life," he said, bringing her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both gallant and utterly natural. The city woman and the rough cowboy, building something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead in the clear California sky. The years had weathered them. Both Quentin's hair was more silver than dark now, and Willa could see lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but they remained solid together, partners in every sense of the word. As Willa approached 60, she began writing her own story, wanting to leave a record for her grandchildren of how their grandmother had come west. She wrote about the letters, about the fear and hope that had driven her to board that train. She wrote about seeing Quentin for the first time, about the disconnect between expectation and reality. Most of all, she wrote about the lessons she had learned, that courage meant taking action even when afraid. That strength came in many forms, and that love was built through shared experience rather than bestowed in a moment of magic. "You make it sound more dramatic than it was," Quentin said, reading over her shoulder. "It was dramatic. I traveled 3,000 miles to marry a stranger based on some letters. That is the very definition of dramatic. Fair point. He settled into the chair beside her desk. What are you going to call it? I thought maybe how I came west with one bag and found the cowboy was rougher and kinder than his letters ever said. He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something beautiful. That is quite a title. It is the truth, she said simply. Every word of it. Rose eventually took over the primary management of the ranch, with Samuel handling the business side from San Francisco, where he had established his own ventures. Grace, now in her 20s, ran a breeding program for horses that was gaining recognition throughout California. The ranch that Quentin had nearly lost to loneliness had become a family operation spanning generations. On their 40th anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration at the ranch. People came from all over the county, friends and neighbors and business associates, filling the property with laughter and music. Willa looked around at the community they had helped build, at the family they had created, and felt overwhelming gratitude. 40 years, Quentin said, his arm around her waist as they watched their grandchildren play. Seems impossible. Seems inevitable, Willa corrected. We were always going to end up here, I think. All those choices we made, they were leading us to this moment. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not gotten on that train? Sometimes, she admitted. I probably would have married someone in Philadelphia eventually, out of necessity rather than choice. I would have lived a small, safe life and never known what I was capable of achieving. I would have been fine, I suppose, but I would never have been happy. Not like this. She turned to face him fully, looking up at the man who had been her partner for 40 years. His face was deeply lined now, his hands spotted with age, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still that startling blue, and the gentleness in them had never wavered. Thank you, she said softly, for writing those letters, for being patient with me, for showing me what love really means. Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on me, he replied, for seeing past the rough exterior to whatever was worth keeping underneath, for building this life with me, day by day, year by year. They kissed, surrounded by family and friends, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. It was not so different from that first sunset when she had stepped off the train, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. But everything else had changed. The frightened city woman with one bag had become a matriarch, a businesswoman, a pillar of her community. The lonely cowboy had become a husband, father, grandfather, his rough edges softened by love but never fully worn away. As the celebration continued around them, Willa thought about all the women who might be reading matrimonial advertisements right now, weighing their options and trying to decide whether to take a leap into the unknown. She wanted to tell them that it would be hard, that the reality would never match the pretty words on paper. But she also wanted to tell them that it might be worth it anyway, that sometimes the best things in life came from the biggest risks. The ranch continued to thrive as Quentin and Willa moved into their 70s. They spent their days helping where they could, but mostly enjoying watching the next generation take over. Grandchildren grew and brought great-grandchildren, and the house was never quiet. On a spring morning when Willa was 75, she found Quentin in the garden where she had planted flowers all those years ago. He was standing among the roses, looking out over the valley that had been his whole life. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," he said simply. "I almost gave up on ever having a family, ever having someone to share this with. Then you came west with one bag and you gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," she reminded him. I gave you hard work and isolation and a life so different from what you knew. You gave me partnership and respect and love that never quit. You gave me children and grandchildren and a home that means everything to me. You gave me a life worth living." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. "Do you think we would do it all again? If we knew then what we know now, would we still take the chance?" "In a heartbeat," Willa said without hesitation. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of fear or doubt, all of it was worth it to end up here with you, surrounded by the life we built together. They stood in the garden as the sun climbed higher, warming the valley, bringing another day of life and work and love. The letters that had brought them together were long gone, turned to dust, but the reality they had created remained. A ranch that supported generations, a family bound by love and shared purpose, a community enriched by their presence. Willa thought about that young woman who had stepped off the train so many years ago, clutching a single bag and fighting panic. She wished she could tell that girl that everything would work out better than she could imagine, that the rough cowboy would prove to be the kindest man she ever met, that coming west would be the best decision of her life. But perhaps that girl would not have believed it anyway. Perhaps some truths could only be understood through living them, through taking the leap and discovering that sometimes the landing was softer than expected. Sometimes the rough exterior hid the most generous heart. Sometimes love was built one day at a time, through shared work and honest conversation, and the simple act of choosing each other over and over again. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Willa knew their story was not unusual. Throughout the West, there were women who had come with hope and fear, men who had offered partnership instead of domination, couples who had built something lasting from the raw materials of chance and choice. Their story was one of thousands, part of the great narrative of settlement and family, and the human drive to create something meaningful. But it was also uniquely theirs, the letters that were both truth and beautiful lie. The first meeting that shattered expectations, the slow building of trust and affection, and eventually deep love. The challenges overcome, the children raised, the ranch built into something that would outlast them both. The partnership that had sustained them through 4 decades of joy and hardship. They reached the house where Grace was already starting lunch, grandchildren running through rooms that had once been so silent. Quentin held the door for Willa, and as she passed him, he said quietly, "I would do it all again too. Every single moment." She smiled up at him, seeing the rough cowboy and the careful letter writer, the devoted father and the passionate partner, all the facets of the man she had chosen and who had chosen her in return. Good thing we do not have to. Once was enough to build a lifetime. But as they entered the house filled with family and laughter and love, Willa knew that if she somehow found herself back on that Philadelphia train platform, bag in hand and fear in her heart, she would make the same choice. She would board that train, read those letters one more time, and step onto the Red Bluff depot platform ready to meet whatever came next. Because sometimes the best adventures began with the biggest leaps. Sometimes rough hands held the gentlest hearts. And sometimes love was not what you expected, but was exactly what you needed, building day by day into something that could weather any storm and outlast any challenge. She had come west with one bag, expecting a gentleman. She had found a cowboy who was rougher and kinder than his letters had ever managed to convey. And in finding him, she had found herself stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever imagined possible. That was worth more than any pretty words on paper. That was worth everything.